Welcome to Igniting Change, the podcast where we explore innovation, industry trends, and how tech for good is solving the world's biggest challenges. Let's get into it.
Hey guys, we are joined. Well, Nicole is back. So you may remember a few seasons ago, we had Nicole from Planned Parenthood on the podcast to talk. I think we were covering International Women's Day. I think that's what the episode was for. But today, we've got you back, and we're really lucky because we actually had you on our panel, our AI for Good webinar panel, fairly recently. I want to say it was last month, I think June, maybe, I think. And I think what really struck us, Nicole, was your particular journey with AI within the organization and how vocal and how transparent you'd been about the journey that you'd been on. And I remember specifically in that panel, you talked about that Planned Parenthood's AI journey kicked off, I think it was back in 2019 with a Watson pilot. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that in detail and what actually pushed you to test a chatbot in the first place?
Yeah, absolutely. So very quickly, hi, my name is Nicole Levitz. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Senior Director for Digital Interventions and Insights at the Planned Parenthood Federation of America. And what that means is I sit in our national office. So of the nearly 600 health centers across the country and currently 47 affiliates, we serve all of them. And I work on the website team and think about our digital products and making them better and more evidence informed and all of this good stuff. I'm very grateful to have worked with Three-Sided Cube a couple of times now and be back with y'all. It's always fun to talk to Puff. We really started in the national office with Watson as a pilot for what has now become our sex ed chatbot, Rue. And in that moment, we had just started the Digital Products Lab, which was the first time from a national perspective, we were thinking about trying new modalities of technology to get out sexual and reproductive health information and act on our mission, and had a little bit of support to experiment in new and different ways and engage some young people and threw a bunch of ideas at them. And one of the first things that really stuck was this idea of leveraging some kind of bot technology for what they saw as the most sensitive subjects, right? They didn't want to talk to a person about this yet. They wanted to talk to a robot in complete confidence and confidentiality, that they were getting an anonymous answer that was trustworthy. And we were so excited to start testing this idea. But as Puff said, this was back in 2019. This is before a GPT and before it was normed to reach out to these technologies. So we were really leaning on what you could argue is like 50 years of psychology that tested in the literature how well chatbots can work with people, right? And what goes well with them and what went poorly with them. The technology on the back end of a bot 50 years ago is really different than that today. The idea and the reception modality is sort of the same, right? There's a unique comfort in talking to not a person about certain things, and leveraging that, we wanted to see if this would be a way to engage our youngest users. And the lab was really focused on engaging teenagers, and Rue was initially designed for 13 to 17-year-olds. So we leveraged Watson for that with a small, probably almost 6-month pilot. And, we learned a lot about the technologies in that moment and sort of quickly learned that wasn't the back end for us for a variety of reasons, and paused and took the time to run it intentionally as a pilot and think about what the learnings were to then go back out into the world on what was most important to go find another technology to leverage.
Well, talk to us about the journey you've been on since, really, because you've obviously done that. This is a live product now out there, isn't it?
It sure is. And you can come to the Planned Parenthood website whenever you want to. And it's right there on the homepage at plannedparenthood.org. There's sort of several things we figured out. When young people are interested in this, they do have questions. We sort of over time, yes, you can engage young folks with these, what they think is some of the most sensitive questions. And at the time, we were framing it as things like masturbation and getting your period, and maybe for young people who didn't have someone to go to with these new things around puberty. And we definitely get that if we invest in reaching those people. But if we don't, as Planned Parenthood, we get what think many of people would assume their birth control questions, their pregnancy questions, their abortion questions, and STI questions sort of time and again. And the bot has evolved over the past, whatever it is, 6 years to meet that need. And the content has changed along with it because our organic users are the people we're serving day in and day out. Especially in the post-Dobbs environment, which 22, the Supreme Court overruled the decision for Roe v. Wade, and that was the Dobbs decision. We've gotten an enormous number of abortion-related questions to the bot specifically because I think of sensitivities around privacy, which was meeting a unique need in a unique moment. And we're continuing to see that push in this new context of regulated sexual and reproductive health and uniquely regulated sexual and reproductive health in the United States right now. And the bots really moved along in time to meet that need as it's risen.
In thinking that you hold your bot to quite a really high confidence threshold. I have 90% circling around in my head, but I don't know if it's exactly that or around that. But I'm pretty sure most commercial models aim for around 60%, but you really push the confidence levels, don't you?
We do, and that percentage is correct. And we are comfortable with the fact that a lot of the time the bot's going to say, I don't know. And we feel good about that because it would be so much worse if it said something that was wrong, because there is a real person that is not going to get this information from somewhere else. They have come to us for a reason. They trust the brand and they expect what is true and what will help guide their decision-making. So we sit in that, which is a really uncomfortable place to be, honestly, because if you turn to another bot, they'll give you an answer most of the time. And it's not that Rue doesn't mostly answer the questions it receives, but they're very specific. And if the user goes significantly off book or confuses the bot using two similar variables in the same statement, it can be really troubling. And one of the things on the panel that was so empowering was hearing these other technology impact leaders deal with these exact same questions and own that we need to be holding ourselves to this threshold consistently. I would argue maybe everyone should be holding themselves to this threshold, but that's a more complicated task when you're not talking about one thing or 20 things, but you're talking about an infinite number of things like some of these other bots do.
You know what? It's so wonderful that you've managed to achieve that, though. And you're really leading, I think, the way in this space because you are holding yourselves to account. But it's just such a high confidence threshold. It's brilliant. And I think, to be honest with you, quite inspiring. So others take note, this can be achieved. You can do this, but there are trade-offs, I guess, that you have to make to be able to achieve that. And it's being okay with those. And I guess I would imagine over time they will change as technology changes. So you kind of have to be a bit fluid as you go through it, but still hold yourselves to account.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think one of the other pieces of the work from a mission perspective, we can make our bot as good as it can be, but that doesn't mean that's the only place people are going to go for information. And how do we leverage what we've learned, leverage our content across the system? And that's something that we're trying to figure out how to do better.
Nicole, talk to us about how you do that. Are you looking at analytic? Are you doing user interviews, a mix of both? How do you do that? How are you constantly monitoring this?
We're doing both all the time. That sort of the new part of our analytics work is checking citations. So making sure that we're being cited at similar percentages consistently, that's going in a positive trend instead of a negative trend. And that's not just GPT, but that's across Google AI Overview and everything else. And it's complex to analyze how you continue to move that, but we're in good company in that we can have a conversation with Google representatives to be like, hey, this isn't moving in the way we think. And I'm like, yeah, but it's our secret sauce. And that's fair, right? That is their proprietary information and one of the true value adds of that brand, and understanding that we're all learning together in this moment. And so much of what this digital space has learned about SEO is driving what these bots are really lifting up consistently for now. Helps me sleep at night so to speak. But I think to your good point, like it's constantly evolving, and that monitoring is going to keep changing.
And I think it's learning to be okay with that. I think it's so difficult. And I think it is so difficult to be okay with that. I mean, I struggle, and I imagine there are listeners out there that are also struggling with that. I think we're in a time where we have to kind of make peace with that and understand that things are continuously improving. But I think for me, it's also at the pace in which it's improving. Like it's not, I'm going to say it's hard to keep up. I'm not going to say it's impossible. Nothing's impossible, but it's really hard. It's hard to keep that pace. Okay, you mentioned earlier, Nicole, sometimes the bot can't always answer questions, or, if further assistance is needed. Have you got any learnings or insights that you're able to share with our listeners today about maybe routing sensitive conversations from a bot, so from AI to humans? Are there any learnings that you can share?
We were lucky to have started our chat program with a live program. And in 2010, when we started a unified Planned Parenthood website for the very first time, we simultaneously started a chat program, mostly to facilitate appointments at that point, but then rolled it out to an actual intervention, which ran for about 15 years and just closed as of July 1st of this year.
Wow.
Which has been an amazing journey that I'm happy to talk more about. But Rue, from day one, had an escalation path to a real human. And originally it was via text message, and you had to open a new window with a keyword. Then it was completely integrated. And part of the platform choice that we got to after Watson was specifically around that integration to a live human, because it was expected at that point. Because remember, the chatbot universe was really, really different back then. And there was no way that our users could manage a bot alone at that point. I think we're in a very different world now. So one of the things we're experimenting is, what does that look like and how does that look? But what we've found consistently, escalation becomes really important for our most sensitive subjects or our most sensitive referrals. So if we're trying to get someone for a specific kind of care at a specific health center, we're really only doing that on a live side. A bot, because of the potential misrouting, is not handling those things. And then highly sensitive topics where there's enormous social work literatures and enormous psychology literatures around things like sexual assault, we consistently refer to a human for those pieces. And we're still doing that via the bot. We're just going directly to the experts in those areas. And so many of the most sensitive topics that we talk about have different experts, whether that's DV Hotline or RAIN, which is the National Sexual Assault Hotline, or many, many other topics.
So incredibly well thought out and well structured. When you started this journey, was it that, or has there, I know we say we're all learning right now, but I guess you would have had to have made changes as you go through and like pivot and change slightly depending on some instances or different scenarios, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, nothing is linear, right? Like it's great, but that's not the world we live in, and that's a-okay. I really think of our chat products as having a few different punctuation points, right? Like Live went live in 2010. In 2012, we actually started tracking our data for real. Within the year of 2015, we completed a randomized control trial and then actually instituted the intervention as it ran for the 10 years following, which was focused on decision-making for the user on the back end, and learned all sorts of cool things, like if people made it from the beginning to the end of the intervention, they were more likely to use a condom and another form of birth control, and they could learn about where their health center was and were more likely to show up, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
and then
amazing how much data you've gathered and like all the insights that you're learning, because you're actually using it. This isn't kind of falling on deaf ears. This is, I mean, it's incredible, absolutely incredible. And I guess what people need to understand is it takes time for this. I think you've had the beauty of time, and I would argue significant investment, which is like people being able to work on this, because not all get that opportunity. But I also think there's an expectation now where people create a product and they're expecting everything all at once. And it's like, it doesn't happen like that. It does take time. You need time to get really good data and insights to be able to make the right changes or the right evolution for a product.
And, they won't be, there's a right answer for the right moment, and that's going to change. And it really is a moving target. Very consciously, my title is Interventions and Insights. And it's because you can't build the product without the insights hand in hand. And it just, the way that we run product is with actionable insights day in and day out, and making everything we can evidence informed. And that can be as simple as just like running what happened last week and deciding to make a change without running that A/B test. Or it can be running an RCT, which like nobody's got time for in the tech space right now. Like building a bot and working with a funder, heaven forbid, forget it. That was like a very different moment. And I'm so grateful that we were able to do that. But it informed where we went with Rue. It's not the only thing that was informing it day in and day out. And running your regular analytics and running tests, as simple or as complex as you want them to be, can just make an enormous difference in that user journey.
I think the phrase, it's evidence-based, right? It's having the evidence to get you the insights to be able to make those recommendations and changes. But too often, certainly in the product space, you see people making recommendations on gut feel or what they think, but there's no evidence to back it up. And I think, my advice to anyone listening today, like have evidence to back up what you're saying, have the data, have the insights. If you do not have analytics in place, get analytics in place before you make any other investments and recommendations for change, because that will tell you more than your gut will, I feel.
And it could be both, right? It's not an either or. So I, in my past life, worked with this incredible professor at New York University, Jim Jackard, who's a decision-making scientist. Like, that's what he does. Based on that literature, consistently, gut feeling does worse than any sort of basic decision schema, which is just like, here are your options, here are the things that I care about, this is how I'm valuing them. It doesn't need to be super advanced math or science. It just needs to be based in a thing, very much as you just said.
And just the analytics are so important. And I think honestly, I get so upset, and I see it time and time again with, new projects coming in, or if we're inheriting a project and there's absolutely no analytics set up. And I'm like, well, how do we know if it's doing what we need it to do? And it sounds so simple, but honestly, it happens more often than not that people have no analytics. So I know sometimes there is an investment required to get those analytics in place, but it's totally worth it if you want to build a long-term successful product. Whatever success means to you, like, you're going to need the analytics in place to help you get there, for sure. Right. Am I right in thinking your team built internal GPT instances that summarize the user research interviews on particular topics? So you were nodding. That I haven't memorized that from the webinar correctly.
You did not memorize that incorrectly. Okay. We are very lucky to have enterprise access to a few different platforms. And one of my colleagues, Dare Hartley, who is fantastic and runs our user research team, built an abortion user-specific GPT. And it's tons of interviews, and you can just type in a question, and this is what users think about medication abortion or traveling out of state for care. And it's such a powerful tool, and it's so simple for the user to access, and it's available across the organization, which is the other piece that becomes the value add, right? Because it's not just our digital products team that's owning it, but it can really be anybody who has questions about that.
It's really making the insights available to everyone. And you're opening it up. So hopefully that positive impact can be had on a greater scale. I guess, has that changed the way and I have to be careful what I say here, because I think everyone is pretty technical these days, but maybe someone that would describe themselves as a non-technical person, has it changed the way that they, I guess, consume research or feed insights back to product cycles? I would imagine it has had quite a big impact.
I think it's starting to. There are still many people that are hesitant to leverage these technologies in their day-to-day work. And we as a team have done enormous work socializing across to make sure that everyone feels comfortable leveraging them. And it, for lack of a better frame, it doesn't feel like cheating because so many people are sitting in that, which is very reasonable on a variety of levels. So I think we are definitely getting there. I am thinking about a specific instance where we were exploring bot technology for some of our analytics for our visualization platform. And I was like, oh, we can hand it to this C-suite member so she can answer her own questions. And she was like, I'm certainly never going to use something like that because I don't trust myself. I could never trust myself with that. There's so much learning we have to do up and down the ladder, as well as across our teams, that has become part of the work now. And I think that's more of where I'm sitting. So we're starting to get that value add as you're teasing at, but I think that trust of the technology really needs to grow first before we get there.
Totally agree. And I think it's this, we're seeing this everywhere in most places, to be honest with you. I think you have, two camps and then you've got everyone in between. And I think there's a sliding scale. And I think, it's not one straight answer from any organization I speak to. Everyone's had different instances. But I guess as we grow and learn together, it will become easier for us to kind of ascertain. But it is a huge challenge. And to be honest with you, I don't want to say it like we're muddling through. Like every day is a new day and we're trying to understand where people sit. And I think as we go further through this and more people are using this kind of technology in their daily lives, it's becoming clearer for us. And I think we can see the benefits more. But don't get me wrong, there are still times where people don't want to trust, or they're nervous to trust.
Yeah, totally.
But it's funny, like it's not funny, but it's ironic that you have, let's say, this particular bot. It's people want to, I'm not saying they trust like a bot more than a human, but they feel more comfortable with a bot. But then in some instances they don't. It's just very context specific, isn't it?
Absolutely.
I don't think you're going to get this with all topics. I think the more sensitive topics, I can understand why people would be more inclined to want to speak to a bot than a human.
Yeah. And that will obviously continue to evolve as you're teasing out, which I think is right. And the way that people want to leverage these technologies and where they go from there, right? I'm thinking about the citations piece and how users will come to leverage those differently or not. Like, will we get to a place where they just disappear and they're in the back end somewhere, not tomorrow, but I don't know. I think those are the kinds of things that we'll be keeping eyes on as this continues to grow.
I mean, it makes sense. I like the citations. I like to know that it's a welcome addition for me because, months ago, years ago, that wasn't a thing. And now it is. And it's like, okay, it's that reassurance, that trust piece of, it's come from a real place. But even then, I'm sure there are hallucinations and question marks over some of these citations. Like, how on earth do you test for that? I don't know. Like a manual, like going through and checking. I mean, gosh, I don't know. But talk to me, because obviously over here in the US, that I feel like there are changes daily, but there's laws change and, how do you verify that answers stay accurate? Like I feel like that's a really complicated thing to do, but it might not be. I don't know. Like, how are you guys handling that?
It is a really complicated thing to do. We are continuing to evolve in how we're handling that in this moment. Previously, it was built into our platform in how to handle that day in and day out. And now it is not because of the complexity and it's changing. So we have actually had the opportunity to engage an incredible organization, AliCorp. They helped build an additional layer for creating greater accuracy in our bot. And we're in the process of implementing that, but are really, really excited. But it's something you have to build yourselves at this point, which is okay, but it makes it harder to do the work for sure.
Yeah. And I think that's the hard, right? Everyone thinks the hard part is getting a product out there, but actually maintaining it and continuously improving, I would argue, is probably the hardest part, because actually you can typically get something up and running pretty quickly. It might be really basic. And don't get me wrong, there are still going to be challenges around that, funding being one as well. But then like pushing that forward, getting the insights and being able to continuously make those changes is like, and again, there's going to be stuff like unknowns because it's not been done before. So you're continuously learning. You can't take everything into consideration. And I think, it's very different from if you were bringing a website to life or a mobile app to life, but a bot in today environment is a completely different beast, to be honest with you. So are you able to share any insights, Nicole, on, I guess, usage? So do you have any insights or data that show how many people are using your bot versus like a standard like ChatGPT, for example? Like, how do you even measure that? Like,
today we don't, because they're sort of apples and oranges without getting greater data on what the range of searches would be on the other side. And we just don't have access to that. So what we've really been relying on is the citations piece more than anything, and then our individual quantitative data of usage and how that's evolving over time. It's been fascinating to see, specifically with Google search, how last year there were functionally 4 releases that truly changed sessions to our website dramatically. And you could see how each individual release picked off different parts of the puzzle. So probably the simplest one was in December. Google introduced this regionality release, and we just lost this like gargantuan percentage of folks who came from outside the United States to our website, basically instantly. And what we saw in January of 25 was 50% of the sessions that we had in January of 24. And some of that is because of that release for the regionality and losing all those global users. Some of it is other things, right, from those other releases and the slow ticking down. But it's been fascinating to see how quickly that drives the change in traffic over to our site, and how specifically.
it's amazing. I would imagine there's going to be people out there listening today having the same challenges and trying to get inspiration and trying to understand how, you're doing it, but how they should be doing it and what they should be looking for. I mean, we're doing the same. Like, full confession, we just launched our new website 2 weeks ago, and we've been monitoring that and trying to understand, I guess, what traffic is coming direct now, what's coming from, ChatGPT, Claude, Perplexity, whatever that your tool of choice is. And there's definitely a growing trend of people coming in more from these tools, from these AI tools. But, compared to, I don't know, Google or direct search, like, it's still a small amount, but you can tell it's growing and it's coming. But trying to monitor those numbers is quite tricky. It's not always straightforward.
Yeah, it's so complicated, but we're learning together, which is great.
So, Nicole, obviously the organization has invested a significant amount of money and time and resource into this space. Has that been an easy journey for the organization, or have you had to lean very heavily on external funding? How have you made this happen?
It's a great question. The good luck of being Planned Parenthood is we are a very strong brand, and we have complicated web of funders in a variety of directions, right? There are the people who are wearing the pennies on the street to very, 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 very wealthy people who consistently donate in a way that I'm so grateful that there are wonderful philanthropists in this world, but we have everything in between. And I think the complexity of our donation base has made this possible. And going back to your point on maintenance being the hard part, it can be really complicated in some scenarios to engage donors on the maintenance piece, right? Like, a new product is very shiny, it's very exciting. A 10-year-old product is less shiny, but it can still be doing amazing work every day. And the ability to reframe and meet the moment to then meet the donor interest and need becomes part of the gymnastics that makes it really interesting and really tricky.
And you say that so eloquently, so gracefully, because it's really, really hard. Like I always think, but this is part of my frustration with, I guess, software design, software development. People don't realize that it's not just a one-off cost to bring something to life. And I use the analogy of, like, it's if you were to get a pet, you need to keep it alive, you need to look after it, you need to groom it, you need to nurture it, you have to take care of it. And it's exactly the same with software development. And I think for me, it starts with education. I feel so passionately that, like, donors need to be educated, and foundations, in terms of how they give away, if they're giving away grants, specific pots of money, well, that's fine for something new and shiny, but how are you meant to then get ongoing funding? And then it becomes really hard, because money it's time boxed, right? It has to be, there's typically, not all the time, but there's so much red tape around funding that trying to bend and maneuver to try and get it in that specific time period, and it's got to tick these boxes. Like, that's a insanely hard thing to do. And I feel like what's happening is it's just becoming harder, and there's no I don't know if, and maybe it's unfair for me to say that people aren't investing in that education piece with donors, but I do think there's a job to be done that we can all, and this isn't just down to Planned Parenthood, this is to all organizations, this education piece of, hey, if we create this new shiny thing, like, there's going to need to be there's a requirement here to keep this alive, to keep this running. You can plan for worst case scenario of it closing down in 2 years or 3 years, but you don't want to do that. You want to plan for best case scenario. So what happens if you have more users and this actually becomes a much bigger channel than you ever thought it would be? How do we fund it in that scenario then?
Right.
But there is definitely an education piece to be done there.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not a one and done piece either, right? And speaking from where I say, that is certainly happening consistently. We're making some progress, but I forget who I was talking to. There's one chapter in Lean Impact, which I don't know if you've read, but I wish I could give to every donor everywhere, just to understand the process and what you're speaking to. And, like, you can't build product and make it live and thrive in this time-boxed donation structure that we have today, right? Like, you're going to know where you're going and have those outcomes before you get there. Like, that's not how product design works. And that's not meeting our users where they are. So much of our education work is around that it's backwards. And we want to be able to move forwards with flexibility to meet users where they are.
And I think that again, you've summed it up beautifully. But so for those listening at home right now, Nicole, what one piece of advice would you have to anyone embarking on some kind of AI product within their organization right now?
I would say two things. One, make sure you're not doing it to say you have an AI product. And I say that with understanding that might not be the ask you receive, and you might not be able to say no, but trying to find the problem you want to solve to meet that modality, right? And give yourself grace as much as you can, which isn't always as much as you need, to test and to play and to really make it the best product it can be, meeting all the demands that are around you.
I think to build on that, it's okay to fail. And I think, not every experiment, every investment is a success. But what we can do is take the learning and insight from that failure, if it is a failure, and inject that into future work so that we don't make the same mistakes, or we don't make the same, we learn from that, essentially. Nicole, you've been absolutely amazing. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for being so honest and open, because this isn't an easy topic, right? I think I said it at the start, but it's so hard to find people to speak really openly and honestly about this. So we really do appreciate your time and energy and effort in this space. If anyone listening at home should have any questions, do reach out to us. You can always reach out to us at threesidedcube.com, and we can try and route those questions or asks to Nicole directly. I'm not going to give away any email addresses, but I will just say that we can try and make that happen. So yeah, thank you very much, Nicole. We appreciate you.
Thank you so much for having me again, Beth. It is always a pleasure, truly, and we'll talk soon.